Did you know that you should be thinking about exiting your business right when you start? And what should you do at that point? And when is a good time to sell? And if you sell, what should you do to set yourself up to make you look great to a potential buyer? We're going to talk about all of that and more in this episode when I talk with Thomas Smale from FE International. He's the expert at buying and selling businesses, and he represents sellers, helping them get the most amount of money they can. Take a listen, take a look. You're going to love it.
Welcome to SaaS-Story in the Making, the podcast that features the people who made the software world what it is today and the leaders who are shaping the future of technology. Here's your host, Matt Wolach.
Welcome. That's right. I am Matt. I am so excited to have you here. This is SaaS-Story in the Making. This is the podcast that helps you run your SaaS business and sell more SaaS deals. I am really excited to be joined by my special guest today, Thomas Smale. Thomas, how you doing?
Hey, Matt. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Super glad to have you here. Let me tell everybody about you, Thomas. Thomas is the founder and CEO of FE International. It's an advisor to the M&A of SaaS, e-commerce, affiliate, and content businesses. And really what they do is they offer access to a global network of established, pre-qualified investors. FE International is perfectly placed to drive buyer demand and maximize value for your business. Really, really awesome stuff. We're going to dive into a lot of that. He's also a contributor at Entrepreneur Media. So when it comes to growing and selling your businesses, Thomas is the man. Once again, Thomas, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for the intro.
Absolutely. So tell me, what's going on with you guys lately at FE International and what's coming up?
Yeah, so I mean, we're a busy world in M&A or mergers and acquisitions at the moment. I think coming out the back of pandemic, lots of people, the nature of the businesses we work with, almost all of the companies we work with are remote. And obviously over the last 12 months, there's been a pretty big shift with companies that previously were not remote at all, were either forced to go remote or just shut down entirely. And then just before we started the recording, we were talking about coming out of the pandemic, beginning to come out of the pandemic. And I think some companies have decided to stay remote. But what that means is there's more and more buyer demand coming into the industry saying, hey, look, we're now comfortable with remote. Whereas 10 years ago when I started FE, most companies with significant amount of money looking to make investments were like, hey, where's the office based? Where are the team? And it wasn't that common to have a distributed or remote team. Whereas now it's much more kind of, I guess, socially acceptable to be set up like that. So we've seen a lot of new demand coming in, a lot of businesses that have been started or even like focused on during the pandemic. Unfortunately, a lot of people lost jobs or maybe weren't getting as many hours. So a lot of people who had like side hustles or side businesses or small businesses they were running on the side may have decided, hey, this is the perfect year to go full time. So we've seen a lot of businesses like that previously, I guess, were nice side incomes become a full-time income for someone. And then obviously we help people sell. So ultimately we see it when it sells and we get paid when it sells, but we see people all the way through their journey. We talk to them very early on, I guess, hence why I come on podcasts like this, where people are, I'm assuming, at all stages of their journey.
Yep, absolutely. So, and let's talk about that. I mean, you guys are an M&A advisor. So what exactly does that mean? And how do you help buyers and sellers of businesses?
Yeah, so I guess M&A means mergers and acquisitions. So merging companies, acquiring companies in very simple terms. Particularly the majority of deals we work on are below $100 million in valuation. At that level, the majority of deals are outright sales. So you sell 100% of your business to an acquirer. So I guess it has the fancy term mergers and acquisitions, but it's effectively selling a business. There are some circumstances where a buyer will give the seller some equity in the business on an ongoing basis. They might say, hey, I'm going to buy 100% of your business, but I'd like you to help me grow the business. So you're going to have 5% in my new entity. But I guess to keep it simple, we're helping people sell outright. And we work with people, it's all the way through their journey of building their business and ultimately selling it. But what what you physically engage us for and pay us for effectively is anywhere from valuation, which is free. And we often do multiple valuations throughout your life cycle. So you might come to us 2 years into your business, then come back at 5 years, and then at 10 years. So we have a lot of clients in 2021 that we first spoke to in 2011, and they might come back every year for valuation, and they're like, hey, now I'm now ready. Either the number makes sense or timing makes sense for them.
That's awesome.
So we work with people all the way through the process. That's free. So I guess that's like our lead generation. That's like, hey, speak to us. We'll give you free advice. If you say, hey, look, now is the time, Thomas, we're ready, or you're probably not speaking to me, you're speaking to my team, we then prepare your business for sale. So we ask you a bunch of questions. We have an audit team who are basically all accountants. They'll go through the financials. They'll prepare everything, make sure there's no discrepancies between what you say and what we're going to present. We ask various operational questions. If it's a SaaS business, we ask lots of technical questions, all sorts of different things. So we then prepare what we call a prospectus. There are lots of different, again, technical terms to describe it, but it's effectively a 20 to 50 page PDF, which talks about your business. And it's our job to, I guess, sell the story and sell everything about the business within that. I guess like similar to a pitch deck you might see if you've raised funding before, but in a slightly more detailed format. So we put that together. We work quite collaboratively with the seller, but ultimately people are paying us because they want us to manage the process for them. So we're then reaching out to potential acquirers on their behalf. That might be strategic acquirers. That might be financial acquirers. It might be acquirers who are somewhere in the middle of the two. But we'll reach out to a real range of buyers, both from our existing network. So we've been in business 11 years. We have a lot of buyers who, similar to sellers, come to us. A lot of buyers come to us and say, hey, we've got $10 million or $1 million, 100,000, 100 million, a billion. There's real ranges in there. We have this to invest. We want to buy SaaS companies. We want to buy e-commerce companies. Here's our criteria. So we'll reach out to them as part of the process. We have a whole team of analysts primarily in our New York office on the M&A side. And their job is to put together lists of potential acquirers and reach out to them. So they'll call them, email them, text them, whatever it might be to get hold of them. And it's, I guess, our job ultimately to put your business in front of as many people as possible. And then we run quite a structured process where we get as many offers as possible for the business, hopefully close to our original valuation, sometimes even higher than that. And then we work on your behalf to negotiate a deal. So again, you're paying us to manage that process. Like, we are expert negotiators. That's what we do. Sellers like to pay us because ultimately, while you can sell your business yourself, there's a big misconception. You don't necessarily need us, but similar to hiring a good accountant or a good attorney, we effectively pay for ourselves.
Absolutely.
If your business is worth, let's say $10 million and we can sell it for 12, like, yes, technically you could have done it yourself and saved the money, but is it really a saving if we would have got you $12 million? Similar with accountants, a lot of people are like, well, yeah, I can file my taxes myself. I'm like, well, yes, that is true. Anyone can file the taxes themselves. Same with legals. Like, technically, yes, you can review and sign a contract yourself, but you don't know what you don't know. And ultimately, it just comes down to leverage. Like any negotiation, if it's just you versus one buyer, then on average, you're going to get a worse deal than we will with 1,000 buyers. The economics, even if you just ignore all the other parts of our service, the value is really in the negotiation leverage and just experience in general.
Well, I always say, I mean, you should work with an expert. Like, whatever you're doing, if you're doing it for the first time or you're a novice or rookie at it, why not get somebody who's amazing at it? Get to be an expert. We talk about that. That's why people come to me for their SaaS sales. Is if they're new to SaaS, they just start a SaaS product, come to me and I'll show you how to set up your sales structure. If you need to sell a product, you sell your or you need to sell your entire business, Thomas and his team, they've done it 100,000 times before. They can just help you do it and set it up right.
Exactly. And as you know, as a sales expert, if your sales process is wrong or not very good, then you could do it 1,000 times and get a terrible result. So a lot of people are like, oh, sales won't, I'm assuming you hear this a lot, like, sales doesn't work for my business. And it's not that sales doesn't work, it's that the way you've been doing sales doesn't work, or outbound doesn't work. No one in our industry uses the phone. No one wants to get on camera. No one wants to meet in person. All those kind of points. It's exactly the same for us. Like, we're effectively, while it's, I guess I like to think it's more complex than it actually is, it's still sales. Like, but we're selling on your behalf. And I think one of the reasons it's important when selling a business is obviously very emotional. While you might think it's not emotional, you've put probably, for most people we work with, it's their first business or maybe their second business. But the amount, what they're going to sell their business for is, in almost all circumstances with clients we work with, the most money they've ever received in one day, and probably ever will be in their life, unless they go on and build another business, which does happen. So often there's like quite a lot of emotion in there. It's quite a lot different from selling the same thing over and over again for $100, $1,000. Negotiate. It's much easier for me to negotiate on your behalf for $10 million than it is for you if you currently have, say, a net worth of 500,000 and you have 50K in your checking account. Like,
that makes so much sense, and I love what you guys are doing. I mean, you guys are representing sellers, and I know that you personally do some buying and selling yourself. What do you love about this, Thomas? What drives that passion for you?
Yeah, so I think when I got into the industry, I think the thing that I liked was the fact it was a little bit different. Like, if you want to go into like real estate, everyone knows about real estate. It's not really like that new and that exciting. And I also didn't, I guess, I personally, obviously I understand real estate, but business made a lot more sense to me. It was like, well, a business, you sell a product, you make money, therefore it has a value. Like, I get that makes sense to me. And then the idea of an online business made sense. Like, we have clients all over the world, and I was like, well, why? Like, we do have a team in an office, but it's like, well, why would you go to an office every day if you can run a business remotely or kind of sell online? So I like the industry of selling online. I guess fell into it by accident 11 years ago when I started the company, but also just love business in general. When I started the company, I did buying and selling myself. I didn't really have any money, but that's what I was doing. And then I got into the advisory side, and then ultimately I've built a team around advising people. But also throughout that entire time, continued to buy and sell myself. Like, as time's gone on, it's become a much smaller percentage of our overall business. So way less than 1% is what we buy and sell ourselves. Primarily because as we've grown and as our reputation has grown, people don't want to hire an M&A firm if they're also like double dipping. So it's like, are you going to buy this business? Are you going to sell this business? If we were 50% of our revenue came from buying and selling ourselves, then I think people would be a bit more skeptical. In our case, it's 1 or 2 deals a year out of the hundreds we do. So yes, technically there might be some times where we might be interested ourselves in acquiring, but we'll always keep it like extremely clear. So from my side, I've always found that buying and selling myself is a good thing because I can stay sharp and I can stay in the mind of the seller. Like, I understand I'm an entrepreneur myself. And while not all my team are necessarily, like, they get it. We've been through the process. Same on the buying side. And while it would be incorrect to say every business we represent on the sell side, I would buy myself. So I'm just not an expert at everything. I can't buy every business that we sell. It just doesn't make any sense. And nor should you want to buy every business. You should only buy something that you know how to run, or at least you think you better figure out how to run.
Yep.
It's always been helpful for us to present businesses in a way that I would want to see it as a buyer. So effectively using my own philosophy on the buying and selling side to create an advisory service around that. And there are lots of different approaches. Like, we're a very hands-on service, very much like boutique. We somewhat like micromanage the process. You pay us and we tell you what to do. We're like, here's our process. If you don't like it, don't work with us. Then there's the complete other side is you can go to a marketplace. You can list the business yourself. You can run the whole process yourself. You can pay like way less in fees theoretically and sell it yourself. But as I mentioned, our value add is the fact we're going to get you more on average. But there's lots of different ways to do it. But I guess what I love about it is kind of built a process that works for me. and then built that works for clients and like really get both sides of the table, even though, as you say, we represent sellers the vast majority of the time.
Sure. So these sellers, and our audience is software companies. So how can software company leaders and owners set up their businesses so that it looks great to potential buyers? What do they need to do to make sure that a buyer sees them and says, wow, this is what I want?
Yeah. So I think firstly, and this sounds somewhat obvious, it's like build a good business, build a good product. If it's popular with customers, chances are a buyer or an acquirer of your business is going to look at it and be like, hey, this makes sense. I can see why people want to use this product. And they might not necessarily be a customer, but often an acquirer is someone who would potentially be a customer, and they get it. They're like, I understand why you have this software product. It solves a specific need that a demographic or multiple graphics have. So a business that's kind of popular with a broad demographic is helpful. We also see products that are so specific and so niche that you wouldn't even think about it as the average person if you don't know anything about that industry. So businesses like that can also be super popular. You don't have to be building a kind of a Slack to be sellable. You can build a Slack for a very specific demographic, and that's still fine. It's still popular. We have acquirers that are looking to buy businesses that can make 100,000 a year, and maybe the biggest they can ever get is $1 million a year. But we also have companies that are buying that can grow to, I don't know, 10 billion in sales a year. There's demand at both ends. So there's no requirement if you want to build a sellable business to have a huge market or huge addressable kind of demographic you can reach. And I think that's one thing that has changed a lot over the last 10 years. When I started the business, if you had a small company making 100,000 a year or $1 million a year, there wasn't really an easy way for you to sell it. If you had a business making $100 million a year, you could call any investment bank, like a JP Morgan, a Goldman Sachs, and they'll pick up the phone and they would love to represent you. But if you call them with $1 million business, they're not even going to pick up the phone.
Of course.
So that's what we did at the time. And from there, we've gone more and more progressively up market over time. So now if you have $100 million business, you're calling us. 10 years ago, you wouldn't have considered calling us for anything above $10 million, but it's kind of progressed as the industry's progressed. So if you build a business in any industry, as long as it's profitable, growing, the product is good and has the possibility of being around for a long time, then there's going to be acquirers interested. You don't necessarily have to check off a list of, and this is definitely one way I've matured over the years. If we did this podcast interview 10 years ago, I would have given you a checklist of 50 things that you must have to be sellable. But these days, I think there's so many buyers in the industry and the market has matured. You don't necessarily need to check all of those things. Like, do you have a product that's evergreen, or at least is arguably evergreen? Is your business growing, or even is it flat? There's still acquirers out there. Is it profitable? Definitely helpful, particularly the buyers we work with. They tend to be financially minded, so they're looking for businesses which are cash flow positive. They can put in a manager or run it themselves and still make money. They're the three main things. And then I could give you things like, oh, your churn rate must be X. Mm-hmm. But the reality is there's not a right or wrong churn rate. And one thing I find, if you read a lot of larger acquirers, you hear about big deals and you're like, oh, the churn rate was like 0.2%. Like, that can be true for a lot of enterprise products, but a lot of people building small SaaS businesses might have a target market who are either consumers or small businesses. And in those cases, churn rate is always much higher. If you're selling a $50 a month product, you're never going to have a 1% churn rate. It doesn't exist. Yeah, your churn rate is probably going to be 7%, which if you ask, again, a JP Morgan or a Goldman Sachs, they're going to say, no, this is terrible. 7% is awful. No one's going to buy your business. But at the lower end, it's absolutely fine. So there's not really a exact checklist you must follow of your business is worth the highest multiple possible if you check all of these things. Ultimately, there are so many different variables in there, it's impossible to count.
Sure. What do you say to entrepreneurs who ask, when is a good time to sell their business? When they say, hey, when should I do it? How does that conversation go?
Yeah, so as I mentioned at the start, we offer free valuations throughout the process. Lots of people we work with will come back to us multiple times. I'd say usually it has to be a combination of two things, like firstly, personal and financial, and usually where those two things overlap. So if you have a family, maybe you're married, or maybe you have parents or siblings you're supporting. If you might have investors, you might have business partner or business partners, all sorts of different relationships we see. So firstly, we don't really give advice around that. Like, we tell sellers ultimately you need to decide yourself. We can tell you what the business is worth and what the process looks like and how long it's going to take to sell, but we can't tell you when the right time is. We can tell you the right time for the business and the general trends, but we don't know personally the best time for you. So that's why we give you a valuation. We say, okay, your business is worth $10 million. It's going to take 3 months to sell. And you might say, actually, my wife and I did some calculations and we actually need $20 million, and then we can retire and go buy a sailboat and sail around the world. We had a client who did that last year. His number was literally tied to the fact he wanted to buy a boat and go sail around the world. And it was kind of in that range. Again, there's no right or wrong way. Some people, I personally don't like sailing, so there's no number for me personally that would involve buying a boat and going around the world. But there's not a right or wrong way to do that. So it's personally, when do you hit the financial goal you have for yourself? For some people, it might be, hey, look, I've got two businesses. One is like growing more than the other. I'm going to sell the smaller one, or maybe not even the smaller one, but the one I'm not as passionate about. And I'm going to either take that cash and go buy a house, or maybe they're going to reinvest all that money into their next business. So that's often why people sell. That they're often not selling their only business or the only business they're ever going to launch. Entrepreneurs generally, by their nature, kind of get bored easily and want to have lots going on. There's very few people who sell and then literally go do nothing forever. Even though a lot of people think that, most people eventually come back and launch something else. So it's very important. Like, part of the reason we offer the kind of free valuation is, I've always felt, as in my philosophy is, if you're paying us for that and you don't know, it's a very personal decision. I wouldn't want people to feel obligated to sell, like they've got kind of sunk cost fallacy. It's like, well, I paid 10K for the valuation, I might as well sell now. I've always felt that's a stupid way to approach it. I think people should take the time. And also, going through the process can be quite long and emotional, going through a negotiation, even though we're doing it on your behalf. So we want you to decide up front if you're up for that. So if you're kind of on the fence about selling, we don't want you to get into a process, because one of the most important elements of negotiation is understanding what you want before you go into that negotiation.
Oh yeah.
If you just go in, you don't really know what you want to achieve, and you're like, hey, I just want the most money possible, or the highest number, or the quickest sale, you're going to be disappointed by the outcome. And also, we can't do our jobs. We're doing a disservice. If every business we promoted, we said, hey, yeah, just make an offer, like, tell us what you think it's worth. Buyers who are on average significantly more savvy than sellers, because they've usually come from a financial background, they might have bought 100 companies for $1 billion in total. Most sellers have not done that. Like, they're savvy, they're generally on average more savvy negotiators than the average sellers we work with.
Great point.
So it's part of the reason why we manage the process as well. We're like, look, you're paying us for expertise. If you want to do it yourself, you can do it yourself. There are marketplaces where you can go manage the process yourself. Do it as you want. You might not agree with our philosophy. You might say, actually, I want to be the one on the call with the buyer negotiating the price. That's fine, but in that case, you don't work with us.
Squashed.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's the wrong approach as such, but I think one thing I've learned over the years, you can't be everything to everyone.
Yeah,
we're very clear about what we offer. If you want to pay us, like, we will do a good job for you. But if you want to do it yourself and run your own process, then you shouldn't work with us. You should go somewhere else. That's kind of what I'd say to sellers as well. It's like, we need to figure out for yourself what you want. I can't tell you we can tell you, like, hey, look, looking at the trends of your business, this is what it's worth now. This is what it might be worth in a year. But as I think anyone who's run a business for a while knows, particularly coming out the back of a pandemic. You have no idea what's going to happen.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people, particularly when they're quite early in their business, when your business is quite small and growing, it's like, oh, I'm growing 15% month over month. I went from 1,000 to 1,150. It's going to keep going. I've extrapolated it to 100 million at the end of year 3. I've not done the math on that, but something like that. As businesses scale, it gets much, in my experience, it gets much harder. Like getting to a million in revenue is tough, but I've seen many situations where people do it themselves with no team. Getting to 10 million is completely different. I've never seen, I don't recall ever seeing a business getting to 10 million, except maybe in the e-commerce space. And even then it's rare, getting to 10 million in sales without a team. It doesn't happen. But I think a lot of people don't realize until I was definitely naive about this myself, how expensive it is to hire people, how much your life changes once you start hiring and managing people. So a lot of people we work with, also the personal decision for them is, hey, I don't want to hire people. I don't want to manage anyone. And you have to be honest with yourself about that. Like I have about 90 people now around the world that effectively report into me directly or indirectly. That's a lot of responsibility. If you ask me what I'm doing on a daily basis, I think a lot of people might think, oh, CEO, you're on the phone, like selling, like negotiating big deals. I'm not usually, most of the time I'm dealing with HR or people related issues. It's like, this person isn't happy. This person wants promotion, all those kind of things. And you don't really realize that until you kind of get into it. And one thing I always say to people thinking about selling, you need to be very sure if you don't sell and you want to hire people, that you're up for that. You can't start hiring people and offering jobs if you're not actually committed yourself, because people leave and you're messing with people's lives. Like people quit a job, they might have a mortgage, they might have kids, they could have all sorts of different commitments. So if you're not committed to your company, then you can't expect them to be either. So a lot of people just choose to sell because they're like, hey, you know what? I'm not up for that responsibility. I like working by myself. So I'm going to sell because I can't scale it anymore myself, which is fine. So that's why we deal with a real range of businesses and we talk to people for years, because you just never know when the right time is. It's a very personal decision and there's no right or wrong way to approach it. Some people love managing people, others hate it, others figure out as they go along. If you asked me 10 years ago, will I be managing 90 people? I would have laughed and said, I can barely even manage myself. But you change and you mature over time, and ultimately you're either up for it or you're not. There's no one can force you to do it. You have to be up for it yourself.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's a huge part of it. Managing people, any business that's growing, it has to happen. And especially in software, and you're going to have a ton of different teams. You've got your dev team, you've got your support team, you've got your sales team, your marketing, all the different things. And there's a lot of different personalities at play. I think it's so critical to be ready for that. Like you said, we think about the time to sell. When's the right time? Know what you're ready for. Know what you can handle, what you want to take on. I think that's absolutely awesome advice, Thomas. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. This has been amazing. I have learned so much already. I love the idea of you guys doing those valuations right from the start, because I have software founders coming to me saying, what do you think my business is worth? I'm like, I have no idea. Like, you need to talk to a finance person about that. So definitely I'm going to be sending them your way. But let me ask you, I want to make sure everybody understands, how shall our audience learn more about you and FE International?
Yeah, so I'd say the best way to do it is you can always find me privately. I'm on social media, so I'm easy enough to track down. But if you follow FE or FE International on social media, go to our website. We have lots of resources for people. There's a lot of people come to us, and even though we offer free valuations, they might be a bit skeptical to even reach out. So we have a lot of primarily written resources, like on our blog. We have ebooks you can download and read. I'm quite often on podcasts, not at the moment, but often speaking at events. So you can find a lot of content we've done over the years. If you just want to read, learn, maybe you want to understand the process from a buyer side, buyer perspective, even if you're a seller. So go to our website, browse around. We have a team who publish content consistently. It might not all be relevant to you, but you'll definitely find things that you find are interesting, whether it's about marketing, valuation, all those different things. Yeah, so I'd start with our website, navigate around, reach out to the team on social media. There's always someone willing to have a discussion. Even if you don't know what you don't know, you don't have to pay us to call us or email in. Like, we're happy to ask questions. And similar to you, like, we're often pointing people in the direction of other companies that can help. It's not always us.
That's great. Perfect. Well, I'll put all that in the show notes. We'll make sure that it's there for anybody who is watching or listening. You'll see all that. But this has been a lot of fun. Thomas, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks so much. Appreciate the time.
Absolutely. And for everybody out there, thank you for coming. Thank you for listening and watching. I really appreciate it. Please give us a rating. Let us know what you think. And please subscribe. I mean, we've got great innovators, leaders, creators, just like Thomas, coming to you, helping you, making sure that you can grow your business and make the most of it. So hit that subscribe, and then we will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.